If you are listening to this is a re-recording of my episodes from season 1 because they were horrendous quality, so they are pretty much the same. There will be a few changes and some updates. I am going to try to get out at least 2 to 3 a week, starting with episode 1, so they should all be re-released soon. So give them another chance if you did not listen to them. Thanks, bye. Hi, welcome to True Crime and Coke. I am your host, Eve, and this podcast is about true crime, disappearances, conspiracies, hauntings, and anything strange or unusual, all while drinking an excessive amount of Diet Coke. If you have a story to share, I would love to hear and feature it on a future episode. Just email me at truecrimeandcoke@gmail.com and put which category it is in the subject line. If you enjoy this podcast and want it to continue, please rate me 5 stars, tell your friends about me, and consider supporting me on Patreon. Now that that's out of the way, let's begin. Hi, welcome to my second episode. I am Eve. One thing before I start, and this goes for every episode. I will be pronouncing names, cities, and all kinds of things wrong, so I'm sorry in advance. This episode is about unsolved serial killings where serial killers are probably still alive and on the loose. So, let's get started. The first one is called the Doodler. Between January 1974 and June 1975, 5 gay white men in San Francisco were killed and their bodies found around the Ocean Beach area of the city. All 5 victims had similar stab wounds, leading police to believe their murders were connected. At that time, a number of similar assaults of gay white men occurred in San Francisco. 2 victims, attacked at separate times in the same apartment complex, gave similar descriptions of their assailant. This led investigators to believe that the 2 cases were linked to the 5 homicides. This killer was nicknamed the Doodler because he had a habit of sketching his victims prior to their sexual encounters and stabbing them to death. The perpetrator met his victims at gay nightclubs, bars, and restaurants. Police theorized the victims had all died after meeting with a suspect near the locations where their bodies were recovered. A consistent method was used in several of the killings, and that was stabbing the victims in the front and back of their bodies. Let's talk about the murders. In the early hours of January 24, 1974, lying face up on Ocean Beach in San Francisco, California, a man had been stabbed to death just hours before. It was determined that while he was being stabbed, he tried to resist his killer as self-defense wounds were noted. He remained unidentified and known as John Doe No. 7 by the medical examiner. He was later identified as Gerald Earl Cavanaugh, a Canadian-American immigrant, and believed to be the Doodler's first victim. He was a single 49-year-old man, and there are very few details about his personal life. Joseph Stevens, best known by the nickname of Jay, was discovered by a woman walking around Spreckles Lake in San Francisco on June 25, 1974. Stevens was 27 years old and appeared to have died recently. He was stabbed to death. He was seen at a club the day prior. He was employed as a female impersonator and a comedian. Officers suspected that Stevens was alive during the time he was at Spreckles Lake, possibly transporting himself to the area alongside his killer. On July 7, 1974, a body was discovered by a woman walking her dog. His death had been somewhat more violent than the previous murders, and he had considerably more stab wounds than Stevens, and his throat was slashed several times. His body was fully clothed. In his possessions, he had a makeup tube, and this suggested to the police that he may have been a closeted gay man. He remained unidentified while police were investigating the cases, which they believed were now related after this third murder. He was later identified as Klaus Christmann, a German-American immigrant. He was eventually buried in his native country. On May 12, 1975, 32-year-old Frederick Elmer Kappen was discovered in San Francisco. He had been stabbed like the other victims, dying from stabs to his aorta. Disturbances in the nearby sand indicated that his body had been moved approximately 20 feet. Kappen was identified through fingerprints when they were matched to those taken by the state for his occupation as a nurse. On June 4th, 1975, in Lincoln Park, another unidentified body was found, and it had been there approximately 2 weeks based on his decomposed state. Initially unidentified, he was later found to be Gerald Goldberg, who was aged 66 and a Swedish-American immigrant. Although connected to the other murders, his murder remains slightly inconsistent as he was far older than the others and his underwear had been taken by his killer and his pants were unzipped. Goldberg is believed to be the final victim of the Doodler. In 1975, sketches of the suspect were made based on surviving victims' descriptions. The man described was aged 19 to 25 years old, black, lanky, and around 6 feet tall. Police questioned a young man as a murder suspect in the case, but could not proceed with criminal charges because the 3 surviving victims did not want to out themselves by testifying against him in court. Among the stabbing survivors were a well-known entertainer and a diplomat. The suspect cooperated with police during his interview, but he never admitted guilt towards the murders and attacks. Investigators stated that they strongly believed that this man in question was responsible for the crimes, but he was never tried or convicted because of the survivors' refusal to appear in court. The suspect has never been publicly named or apprehended, and very little information is available about the crimes. In 2018, police released an updated sketch of the Doodler. The next unsolved case is called the Flat Tire Murders. During a 6-month period in 1975, an unidentified individual murdered 5 women in South Dade County, Florida, then abruptly stopped. Although there were several theories and possibly upwards of 9 or more related deaths, no suspect was ever identified and the case remains unsolved. The murders began on February 1st, 1975, when 20-year-old Judith Ann Osterlin was found dead. She had been stripped of clothing and dumped in a canal. At the time of her death, she had been working in a massage parlor and was last seen alive, leaving work at 9 p.m. She was known to use hitchhiking as her primary means of transportation. However, her killer was later discovered to be a 22-year-old Miami woman and not the flat tire murderer. Later that month, another body was found. 23-year-old Barbara Stevens was kidnapped from a South Dade shopping mall by an unknown individual. She was later found stabbed to death. When investigators located her car, they found that someone had deliberately let air out of one of her tires. On April 12, 1975, 17-year-old Arietta Tinker was found drowned in a canal located not far from where Osterlin was dumped. Tinker was the only victim who was married, but she was separated from her husband at the time of her death, and they had a 1-year-old son together. Then nothing was reported for several months, and then the killer struck again. On June 5th, 1975, Nancy Lee Fox, a waitress at a taco restaurant, was last seen walking home alone. Fox had moved to Fort Lauderdale from West Palm Beach after the end of an unhappy relationship. The body of the 19-year-old was later found dumped in the same canal where Judith Osterlin's body was found. The canal is located just north of the Dade-Broward line. On June 18th at 10 p.m., 2 high school friends, 14-year-olds Barbara Schreiber and Belinda Zett, a rower, were last seen hitchhiking. They were later found murdered and their bodies dumped side by side in a Broward canal. They both had been stripped of their clothing, sexually molested, shot with a heavy caliber handgun, one to the head and the other in the chest. 3 weeks later, on July 10th, the body of another teen, 15-year-old Robin Losh, was found drowned in the same canal, just 200 yards from where the bodies of Osterlin and Fox were found. Losh was found fully clothed. The police believe the killer felt comfortable in the area because he continued to return and dump more bodies only short distances apart. On July 22nd, 1975, 27-year-old Ronnie Gorland's car was found in a North Miami shopping mall parking lot with one of the tires deflated. The following day, her body was found in the same circumstances as some of the previous victims. She was face down in the canal, and her clothes were removed except for her sandals, and she was sexually assaulted. Gorland had been working in Latrobe, Pennsylvania, and was planning to get married to her boyfriend Thomas Phillips the following February. 8 days later, 21-year-old Elise Knapp was found dead in the exact same way, in a canal located less than a mile from where Ronnie Gorland was found dead. It was determined that she had drowned in 10 to 12 feet of polluted water after being hit on the back of the head. Only one item was left on her body, a necklace bearing a small charm with the Hebrew symbol for luck. Her death was so similar to Gorland's that investigators immediately linked the two to the same perpetrator. Knapp, who worked as a secretary for Kelly Girl Services in Broward, came to Florida for the summer and originally was from New York. She left her Hollandale apartment on July 30th and was last seen at the Hollywood Shopping Center. This is where her car was located and was found to have a flat tire. On August 17, 1975, another body was found in a rock pit. It was the wife of Seth Gordon, an administrative aide to Senator Kenneth Myers. Mrs. Gordon's car, a bronze Vega, was found in the same parking lot that Ronnie Gorland's car was. However, her tires were not deflated, and when her body was discovered, it was fully clothed. Investigators surmised it was either a different killer responsible for Mrs. Gordon's death, or the same killer had now altered his M.O. On August 29, 1975, the assistant medical examiner of Dade County stated his belief that 5 of the killings, those of Stevens, Schreiber, Zett, Gorland, and Knapp, were committed by the same perpetrator. In September, it was reported in the Sentinel-Star that each of the victims' cars were found with one flat tire, parked in shopping center parking lots, and each drove a rental or lease car with E-tags. It was also stated that each of the victims were Jewish, which meant the killer was extremely selective in his victim choice. I doubt that was just random. Each victim was found stripped of their clothing except for a single item. The rest of their clothing was never found and had been taken by the killer as a souvenir. Investigators explained that the killer was perhaps a fetishist who kept the victim's clothing as part of his fantasy. The medical examiner believed the victims were killed using a variety of methods, including shooting, stab wounds from an ice pick, and blunt force trauma from the use of a hammer. Initially, only some of the murders were thought to be committed by the same person, and this was due to the similarity of the crime scenes, the M.O. of the killer, and the signature used. Others believed these murders were committed by a much more prolific serial killer. The initial theory proposed by Sonoma County Sergeant Erwin Carlstead was that it was the work of the same person who was also responsible for the deaths of young women in the states of Washington and Utah. Carlstead believed this killer was bicoastal and traveled from east to west, committing over 30 murders throughout the country. Side note, bicoastal means you are attracted to both sides of the United States. Ha-ha! However, on August 16, 1975, a breakthrough was made in connection with the murders in Utah when Ted Bundy was arrested after he attempted to evade Utah policemen for a routine traffic stop. He was later linked to other murders in Washington, Idaho, and Colorado. Florida investigators dismissed Carlstead's theory and concentrated their search for an individual who had a very clear M.O. He would deflate the tires of his victims in commercial parking lots and then offer them assistance before kidnapping and later murdering them. According to police, the killer is likely very intelligent, with an above-average IQ, above-average strength, and prowess. The flat-tire murderer has never been caught and to this day might still be deflating people's tires and stalking them. You never know. If you want to go down a rabbit hole, this case is most definitely an oversized rabbit hole to get lost in. The February 9th killer is the next uncaught killer, and it is very strange. It started on February 9th, 2006, when Sonia Mejia, a 29-year-old Taylorsville, Utah woman, was found murdered in her bedroom. She was also 5 to 6 months pregnant, and the unborn baby was also dead. She was found by her husband, who lost not only his wife, but his child too. The autopsy revealed that she was strangled and sexually assaulted. According to an investigation, Mejia did not know her attacker and was possibly stalked before the attack. An eyewitness account stated that a Hispanic man wearing shorts and a white t-shirt was talking to Sonia when the discussion turned violent, and the man forced his way into her house. My question is, why didn't this eyewitness call the police when she witnessed this event? Anyways, her car and some of her jewelry were missing. The car was later found abandoned outside of Murray, Utah, but her jewelry was never recovered. Despite assistance from federal agents, the case went cold. Then, exactly 2 years later, on February 9th, 2008, 57-year-old Deminia Castillo was found dead in her West Valley City, Utah home by her son. Leads quickly dried up and the investigation went inactive, but only briefly. In early 2009, a crime lab performed tests on DNA samples recovered from both crime scenes, and voila! A positive match was made, which connected both cases. As a result, police set up an 8-man task force to work on the cases. A physical description of a suspect was released. He was a Hispanic male in his late teens or early 20s, short black hair, and of medium height and weight. February 9th, 2009 was about to arrive, and the Utah police were on high alert due to a possible resurfacing of the killer. But no murders similar to the killer's MO occurred that day. As of 2011, the February 9th killer case was classified as a cold case. In November 2018, it was announced that a suspect was in custody and in the process of being extradited back to Utah to face murder charges. His name has not yet been made public. And update, I looked to see if there has been any updates on this case, and I could not find any. So the killer had no prior history in any criminal database, so any day now I think he could be caught. However, if you are a woman living in Utah, I would be extra careful on February 9th. The Frankfurt Slasher is the next case. On August 26, 1985, at 8:30 a.m., a partially nude and clearly deceased female was found by transit workers at a train yard in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, in the section of the city known as Frankfurt. The woman's clothing was removed from the waist down, and she was positioned in a provocative manner with her legs open and her blouse pulled up to reveal her chest. The next day, she was identified as 52-year-old Helen Patton of Parkland, Pennsylvania. The autopsy revealed that she was sexually assaulted, and the cause of her death was from 47 stab wounds to her head and chest. She also had one deep slash across her abdomen, which left her organs fully exposed as she died. She was last seen by her ex-husband at their home 7 days prior. Helen was known to frequent Frankfurt area bars. On January 3, 1986, 10 miles away from where Helen Patton's body was found, the body of 68-year-old Anna Carroll was discovered in South Philly. Someone noticed her door was left wide open on a cold day and thought it odd. Her body was found on the floor of her bedroom, positioned in a provocative manner, being nude from the waist down. She had 6 stab wounds to the neck. There was also a gaping postmortem wound from her breastbone going to her groin with a kitchen knife that was still left inside of her. It appeared as if her attacker had literally tried to gut her like a fish. Nearly a year later, on Christmas Day, 1986, 64-year-old Susannah Olseph was found murdered in her home on Richmond Street after the front door had been left open. She had been stabbed in the back 6 times. After this crime, the connection was made that the murders of Helen Patton, Anna Carroll, and Susannah Olseph were related. Not only were the crimes related, but all 3 women were frequent patrons of the Frankfurt area bars, specifically the Frankfurt Avenue Bar and Goldie's. This area was well known for its drugs and bars, and it appeared run down, but it was featured in the scene of the film Rocky, which seemed to make people a little bit less leery of the area. At 7:30 a.m. on January 8, 1987, Gian Durkin's body was discovered beneath a storage truck just off of Frankfurt Avenue, lying in a pool of blood. She had been stabbed in the back, chest, and buttocks 74 times. She was nude from the waist down and positioned with her legs spread. Blood was splattered along the fence next to the truck, and an autopsy showed she had been sexually assaulted. Gian Durkin lived on the streets and was most commonly seen sleeping in the doorway of a bakery just 2 doors down from Goldie's bar. By the 4th victim, it is clear that Philadelphia had a serial killer on their hands, but they were busy in the midst of figuring out several other series of crimes as well. The Frankfurt Slasher was active right around the same time that Gary Heidnik and Harrison Graham were busted, so the city was pretty busy already. And these are 2 other serial killers I will be doing an episode on in the future. In January of 1988, police had reported to the local papers that the crimes might not be related despite similar circumstances. My guess is that they did not want to further scare the community that another serial killer was again amongst them. They changed their mind, though, the following year, when in January 1989 came the murder of Margaret Vaughn. She was a 66-year-old woman who had been evicted that same day from an apartment. Her body was found just 3 blocks away from where Gian Durkin's body was found. Margaret Vaughn was stabbed 29 times and positioned in a provocative manner. Police came up with a sketch of a man who was seen drinking with Margaret the night before at Goldie's. He was a barmaid, a white man with a round face who walked with a limp and wore glasses. On January 19th, 1989, 30-year-old Theresa Schierotino was found in her apartment. She was in a pool of her own blood on the kitchen floor, lying face up. There were 25 stab wounds made by a kitchen knife, which was left at the scene, and next to a bloody 3-foot-long piece of wood that had been used to sexually assault her. She lived just 3 blocks away from the 5th victim and 1 block from Frankfurt. More similarities popped up as police soon discovered that Schierotino and Durkin were recently seen in several psychiatric institutions and under outpatient treatment at the time of their murders. And guess what? Both were regulars at Goldie's bar. On April 29th, 1990 at 2 a.m., a patrol officer discovered the nude body of Carroll Dowd in an alley behind Newman's Seafood at 4511 Frankfurt Avenue. She had been sexually assaulted and stabbed 36 times. One of the wounds went across her stomach and her intestines were left spilled out of her body. Carroll Dowd had recently been diagnosed with schizophrenia and was in and out of mental institutions, something else she had in common with the other victims in the slashings. Police began interviewing employees of the fish market and came across Leonard Christopher, an employee who lived nearby. He encountered the place in the alleyway that morning and stated that he figured that police were investigating just another burglary, one of many recently. He spoke further with police upon finding out that it was a murder investigation. Leonard Christopher admitted that he knew one of the earlier victims, Margaret Vaughn. He claimed to have been home alone the night of the murder, but his girlfriend could not provide an alibi for him, and, to make matters worse, witnesses placed him at the bar that night with Dowd. Furthermore, a witness said that they had seen him sweating with a large knife in his belt the night of the most recent murder, and a search of his apartment turned up clothing with blood on it. And one witness claimed to have seen him exiting that same alleyway she was found that night. On May 5th, 1990, Leonard Christopher was arrested and arraigned on charges of robbery, abuse of a corpse, murder, and possession of an instrument of crime. On June 20th, 1990, Christopher was ordered to stand trial for the murder of Dowd, and the evidence was deemed sufficient. Neighbors were relieved to know the murderer was caught and they would now be safe. But there are always 2 sides of the story. Christopher's co-workers and landlord vouched for his good character, and his co-workers said the bloody clothes found were due to him cleaning up the mess from the crime scene, which was left as is in the alley of the workplace. There was also a witness that said they had seen Dowd leaving the bar with another guy in his vehicle. Also, at the time of his arrest, Leonard Christopher had no visible injuries, he cooperated with police investigations, and there was no murder weapon recovered. Furthermore, Leonard Christopher was a young black man, not the middle-aged white man that was seen with all the other victims around the time of their murders. Yet he was jailed without parole for the murder of Dowd on September 6th, 1990, and guess what, ladies and gentlemen? Also on September 6th, 1990, while Leonard Christopher, the murderer, was in jail, another body was found. 30-year-old Michelle Diener was found murdered in her apartment just 1 block off of Frankfurt. Ironically, Michelle Diener was once a suspect for the killings because she was seen fighting over a blanket with another victim, but her death definitely ruled any suspicions out. She was sexually assaulted and stabbed 23 times with a final gaping slash to her stomach, which exposed her intestines. This murder was only 3 blocks from the most recent attack and on the same street as Schierotino's murder. Michelle Diener was also mentally ill. Locals referred to her as Crazy Michelle as she wandered from bar to bar on Frankfurt, and if she wasn't too busy drinking through her day, she'd sell pretzels on the street. Oh, and guess what? Just 1 day before her murder, she was seen leaving a bar with a middle-aged white male who fit the original description of the Frankfurt Slasher. After this incident, there was public outcry for the release of Leonard Christopher, but this never happened. He was sentenced to life in prison without parole and has since died of cancer. Okay, so let me give you my opinion on this, since you didn't ask. It sounds like the police really needed to investigate the psychiatric facilities. These were very brutal, sadistic killings. It could have been another patient in the facility, or possibly even a worker. Any medical records would have since been destroyed, but I think if an employee did kill these women, he would have taken parts of their medical records for souvenirs. He could still be alive today, but probably too old to be much of a threat. That is the story of the Frankfurt Slasher. Keep your eyes open for estate sales near Frankfurt, Utah, as there could be a box of souvenirs for sale at a bargain price of up to 9 women and 1 innocent man. The next one is the B1 Butcher, who is an unknown serial killer in Namibia, South Africa. The B1 Butcher got his name from the Namibian media because the murder victims being found in close proximity to the Namibian National Road B1, which crosses the country from north to south. The butcher part of the name stems from the professional way in which the bodies were dismembered. Body parts were found in June and July 2007 in the Komos region along the B1 and the greater Windhoek area between Rehoboth and Okaanja. The body parts were wrapped in garbage bags and belonged to 3 different women. The head and arm of one of the victims were found a month later, and further body parts of that same victim were discovered in September 2007 further north. Only one of the 3 bodies were identified, that of 36-year-old Sana Helena Garros. On October 2007, investigations were helped by 3 senior serial murder detectives from the Republic of South Africa. Upon investigation, the B1 Butcher was active as far back as 2005 when 2 similar unexplained murders of women occurred. The butchered women were 21-year-old Juanita Mabula and 22-year-old Melanie Jantz. Their deaths were added to the B1 Butcher's list. All 5 of the B1 Butcher's victims were young or middle-aged Namibian women. Each of the 3 identified victims was fluent in Afrikaans, Damara, or both. In addition, all victims' body parts showed signs of freezing or refrigeration, suggesting that they were in some sort of cold storage. The method of killing, however, was different. Jantz was strangled, and Mabula was hit on the head with a blunt object. At least 2 of the 3 identified victims were prostitutes working in Windhoek's downtown area. Two of the victims, Jansen Gross, apparently knew each other well. In August 2007, German citizen Heinz Niram was arrested because he was suspected of raping a 29-year-old Namibian woman near Windhoek the previous month. He supposedly tried to strangle her too. Niram denied all allegations. In February 2010, he was acquitted for lack of evidence and released from custody. Niram sued for damages against the Namibian government due to this ordeal of having been accused as being the B1 butcher. In 2008, a man named Hans Husselman from Rehoboth took his life after being implicated in the murders. He had served a life sentence for 2 murders before and was only released in 2004. Although Gross's DNA was found in Husselman's flat, and Husselman's DNA was found on a letter to the police concerning the Mabula murder, evidence was inconclusive. At that time, suspicions arose that the B1 butcher might not be one single person, but rather one lead actor and several copycats. In 2010, a human head and arm were discovered on a farm in Rehoboth, raising fear that the butcher might be active again. A connection to the murders of the B1 butcher in this was, however, not considered likely because it did not show many of the previous similarities. The body parts were not found near a highway and were burnt instead of frozen. So could this killer still be out there, or did that killer off himself in 2008, leaving only copycats? Either way, the copycat is also a murderer who is still on the loose. The case is still unsolved. The next case is the West Mesa bone collector. In February of 2009, a woman walking her dog discovered what she believed to be human bones on a mesa near Albuquerque, New Mexico. When police investigated, the remains of 11 women were discovered along the same stretch of land. Most of the women were of Hispanic descent, all were sex workers, and one of the women was pregnant. While the case remains unsolved, police do have 2 major suspects. However, of the 2 suspects, one is dead and the other in prison on an unrelated charge. Lorenzo Montoya lived in a trailer a few miles from where the victims were found, but he was killed in 2006 by a sex worker who, if he was the West Mesa bone collector, was most likely going to be his next victim. Joseph Blee was a known rapist in the area, and when police invaded his home, they found a stash of women's jewelry and underwear. And of note, a tree tag from a nursery where Blee worked was found in the area where the West Mesa victims were buried. Blee was sentenced to 36 years in June 2015 at 58 years of age for rape. Update: here is some more information I did not include in my original episode. The remains discovered in 2009 were identified as those of the following women and girls, all whom disappeared between 2001 and 2005. Jamie Barella, aged 15, Monica Candelaria, aged 22, Victoria Chavez, aged 26, Virginia Cloven, aged 24, Cinnamon Elks, aged 32, Doreen Marquez, aged 24, Julie Nito, aged 24, Veronica Ramiro, aged 28, Evelyn Salazar, aged 27, Michelle Valdez, aged 22. She was the woman who was 4 months pregnant when she was killed. And Selania Edwards, aged 15. She was a runaway from Lawton, Oklahoma, and was the only African American and the only victim from out of state. On December 9th, 2010, Albuquerque police released 6 photos of 7 other unidentified women who may also be linked to the West Mesa bone collector. Police would not say how or where they had obtained the photos. Some of the women appear to be unconscious, and many share the same physical characteristics as the original 11 victims. The following day, the police released an additional photograph of another woman. This woman was subsequently identified by family members who reported that she died of natural causes several years earlier. On December 13, 2010, police reported that 2 of the women in the photos had been identified as alive and could have valuable information if they could be located. In June 2018, more bones were found near the site of the burials, but these were later determined to be ancient and not related to the West Mesa murders. According to satellite photos, the last victim was buried in 2005. Unfortunately, police have not been able to confirm anyone as being the West Mesa bone collector, and the case is still open today. The next one is Brazil's Rainbow Maniac, and he was, and maybe still is, a serial killer in Carapicuíba, Brazil, who targeted gay men and transvestites over the span of 18 months between 2007 and 2008. The Rainbow Maniac killed 13 men execution style, which is a bullet to the head. All were killed in Preter's Park and then dumped in nearby bushes with their trousers around their ankles. One of his victims was beaten to death, and his 12th victim was shot 12 times. The victims ranged in age from 20 to 40 years old. Although the city was considered to be a more progressive city in South America, at the time of the murders, several ultra-conservative groups were highly vocal about their disgust of homosexuality. It was thought that the person responsible for these killings was from one of these groups. On December 10, 2008, police arrested a retired police sergeant, Francisco Franco, based on witness statements implicating him in a murder which occurred on August 19, 2008. A witness claims to have seen Franco shoot a black gay man 12 times that night, and the maniac is still out there. If the jury got it wrong and Mr. Franco was actually guilty, I don't think he would have stopped killing, but he would have started hiding any further victims. The next is the Ibadan Forest of Evil. In Nigeria, there's a place now known as the Forest of Evil. It was discovered in 2014 when a motorcyclist looking for his missing colleagues made his way into the Soka Forest in Ibadan, Nigeria. What he found was something from a horror movie. He found a small colonized area of decrepit buildings, and once inside, he found over 20 rotten corpses and severed human heads. He also saw 10 barely alive people chained to slaughter benches. In other buildings, he found piles of clothes, boots, and passports. Exactly who might be responsible is still unconfirmed, but rumors state that the place may have been a den for religious zealots or ritual sacrifice. Since the discovery of the forest, many Nigerians with missing relatives have flocked to the area to search for their loved ones. Update. I have since found more information on this case, and just when you think it couldn't possibly get worse, well, it does. So, because of that, I decided that I will do a future episode about it as soon as I can, so don't go Googling it. Please wait and let me tell you the story in my own way. The next case is the Smiley Face Killers. The Smiley Face Killer is a strange case. 45 college-aged males across a 20-year span were all found drowned after getting intoxicated. This sounds like an easy-to-close case, right? Well, here's the thing. At each of the drownings, which occurred in 11 different states, there was a smiley face nearby in at least 12 of the victims. This is why these killings are dubbed the Smiley Face Murderers or the Smiley Face Killers. Some detectives and web sleuths think these drownings are actually the work of a serial killer or a group of serial killers. They believe that these men are abducted, murdered, and then disposed of in bodies of water to give the impression of accidental drowning. So, it's definitely a stretch to connect the murders, but they have a few things in common. The first connection is upon toxicology of the bodies. Date rape drugs were found in the system of the victims in amounts sufficient to render them completely unconscious. The second connection is that the victim profile is very similar in every case. A white male who is athletic, successful, and popular. The last similarity is the condition of the bodies. One victim had been missing for 40 days, but once found, the deterioration of the corpse was nowhere near consistent with someone who had been in water for 6 weeks. This was also the case for multiple other victims. There are many skeptics of the smiley face killer theory, and whether you believe the story to be true or not, I always recommend if you go to bars and clubs to keep your eye on your drink. Go with friends, don't leave with strangers, etc. But perhaps, if you are an attractive, athletic, successful young white male at a bar located around water, maybe, just maybe, don't ever let your guard down. The next is the vending machine killer. Japan's infatuation with vending machines is widely acknowledged. And if you don't know, in Japan, it can get kinky AF. There are vending machines that sell used panties and all kinds of sex stuff. That had nothing to do with the story. I just wanted to let you know that they have those type of vending machines over there as well. Anyway, there are 5 million vending machines across the country of Japan, making an average of 1 vending machine per every 23 people. Between April and November of 1985, someone wanted to take kinky vending machines to a whole other level. Murder. The vending machine killer's first victim died on April 30th in Fukuyama after consuming a beverage laced with the poisonous herbicide paraquat. This drink was found on top of the vending machine. After this, 11 more murders occurred between September 11th and November 17th, possibly making this the deadliest product tampering case in history. Most of these drinks were retrieved from outside the vending machine. Vending machine operators posted warnings on machines telling people not to consume drinks found in or around the machines, after which the poisonings stopped. It was established that at least one other unknown person attempted to imitate the paraquat murders by putting lime sulfur into drinks in Tokyo. There were also a small number of people who attempted to poison themselves in a method imitating the murders and were seriously injured. When authorities looked into the circumstances surrounding these poisonings, they found that most of the victims had one thing in common. They'd recently consumed the drink, or Vitamin C, which is an energy drink with added vitamins, and it sells in the billions every year. It was not a vendor who filled the machine that was the killer. You see, the company behind Uranium C had launched a marketing campaign offering free bottles of the drink from vending machines, and whenever someone made a purchase, the person would sometimes place the Uranium C drink on top of the vending machine for someone else to take it if they didn't want it for themselves. Police soon pieced things together and found that someone had been lacing the Uranium C drinks with poisoning and placing them on top of the vending machine. It's pretty much impossible for the police to track down the person responsible, since it was difficult to not only narrow down where the person had originally picked up the drink, but also because most of the vending machines responsible were in quiet back streets with no CCTV around. The culprit has not yet been found and probably will never be. This is just another reason not to take a drink or accept a drink that's just been sitting there, even if it looks like it has not been opened yet. And you guys, if there was a super cold and unopened Diet Coke laced with paraquat sitting on top of a vending machine, I would totally take it, thinking someone pushed the wrong drink choice, and I was a lucky girl. The next one is the maniac with dull eyes, also known as the Danilevsky maniac. He was, and possibly is still, a Russian serial killer responsible for at least several murders between 2004 and 2007. Police also linked the maniac with a series of murders dating back to 1999 and suspected in the murder of a young woman in 2010. His total assumed victim count is 17. Here's the story. At construction sites and in abandoned buildings, several dead women were found dumped. All of the victims were between ages 17 and 23 years old, and all were raped prior to their slaughter. And perhaps the creepiest thing is that at each scene, the killer left a calling card in the form of pornographic drawings on nearby walls. This was what established that one person was responsible for these murders. This serial killer has never been caught, and I highly doubt he would just stop killing by choice. So one thing is that these pornographic drawings left at the crime scenes were pretty darn good, which makes me think he was or still is an artist of some sort. The last story is the monster of the Andes. Although this serial killer is identified, he is on the loose. Pedro Lopez was born in Colombia in 1948. He was the son of a prostitute, and as a child was forced to watch his mother partake in extreme sexual acts. He was often molested too. Pedro Lopez claimed that these events significantly affected his psyche. That would be awful. By the early 1970s, Pedro Lopez started to rape and kill young girls across South America. When an attempted abduction went wrong in 1980, Pedro Lopez was apprehended by locals and handed over to police in Peru. Once in custody, Lopez spewed out his colorful life story, including being captured by a native tribe and sentenced to execution for killing a young girl. He then said he killed about 3 girls a week for the past 2 years, raising his total number of victims to 300. Police were naturally skeptical of such a claim, but Lopez led police to a mass grave site where they found the remains of 53 of his victims. The details then went a little hazy, and different sources report different stories, but they all confirm that Pedro Lopez was set free from prison in 1994, despite racking up one of the highest body counts known in history. He was only sent to a mental health place for 3 years and then set free. In 2002, Pedro Lopez was suspected of being responsible for another murder. However, no one has been able to find him since 1998, and he did not stop killing. So that wraps up my second episode do-over. Please rate me 5 stars and leave good reviews on Apple Podcasts. Check out my YouTube page and consider supporting me on Patreon. Links to everything will be posted in the show notes. So thank you for listening and have a good evening.